Spotify really wants to be, as they put it, the audio browser of the world. So the more and more types of content that they're offering on their service, we're seeing that they want to be what the Google search bar is for information on the internet. They want to be that entry point for audio.
Hey gang, it's Monday, May 17th. Peter and listeners, welcome to the Behind the Numbers Daily, an eMarketer podcast made possible by VTEX. I'm Marcus, and I'm joined today by one of our forecasting analysts. It's Peter Vahle.
Hey Marcus, I'm happy to be here.
Hey chap, happy to have you. No comments on the hat. I'm surprised.
Well, I was waiting until we started recording, and then I was going to blow up your spot. Let them know that you were betraying your Lakers.
I'm not betrayed. I've abandoned ship. I'm a Spurs fan now.
Wow, that's big news.
I just like the colours.
It looks like a retro hat. It looks like...
Exactly.
Yeah,
they're fun retro
vintage
colours. Yeah. Tell nobody. Anyway, today's fact, not that I've jumped ship. Babies don't have real kneecaps. A lot of people might be thinking, yeah, of course they don't. I didn't realise this. So I found this out sometime recently because I was at a friend's house. They have a baby. The baby is like 6, 7, 8 months old at the time. And me and the baby invented a game, because we're best friends, where you crawl around the kitchen island after each other. And after about 6 minutes of this, my knees were killing me. I'm on wood flooring them in a bad way. The little man, he's still smiling like it's nothing. So I asked one of my two friends, his parents, one of them's a doctor, I was like, how is he doing this? And she said it's because babies' knees aren't hardened yet. They remain soft cartilage throughout their childhood until they eventually turn into bone. Is everyone like, yeah, you fool?
I know nothing about babies, so
okay.
You could have told me anything, but that's interesting.
I know less than you.
I'm glad you made a friend.
For sure. He's my best mate now. We're pretty close. And I was thinking if I had baby's knees, I'd crawl everywhere. Everywhere. I would never walk another day in my life.
You wouldn't get very far.
That's true. I haven't thought about that. Yeah, change of plan. I'll walk places. Anyway, today's real topic, Spotify. So, Peter, we are talking about Spotify. They told the world how they did in the first 3 months of the year. And we're going to be talking about their earnings, how much money they made, how many users they gained, and some other stuff as well, some other Spotify news, subscriptions, things of that nature. So we'll start with user highlights. Spotify added 11 million new users in Q1, reaching 356 million. Good enough for 25% growth year on year. The company added 4 million premium subscribers in the quarter, totaling 158 million. And 9 million, they added 9 million ad-supported people, reaching 208. Premium users year-on-year growth was 22%. Ad-supported year-on-year growth, user growth was 28%. Peter, your thoughts on the number of people Spotify managed to add in Q1?
So looking at overall monthly active users on Spotify in Q1, it came in at the lower end of their guidance. Their guidance was 354 to 364 million listeners, and they came in at 356, so the lower end of that. Now,
so lower end of their guidance, was it? It seemed like it was the higher end of other people's expectations, though.
Yeah, they did pretty well, but we have to keep in mind they launched in 86 new markets in Q1.
Right.
So
I thought I misread that.
So think about that. They have a whole lot of new people to potentially, bring into their services. So growth is a little less impressive when you think about that, but they did all right. They grew overall listeners, and like you said, they grew premium listeners. They actually added premium listeners at the top of their guidance. So they did pretty well. A lot of people became paid subscribers to Spotify, which is where they get most of their revenue. So that, was a good sign for them.
Yeah, folks, I guess they were wondering if they had too much growth in 2020, if they pulled forward too much of that growth into 2020, would there be any left for 2021, early 2021? As you mentioned, they launched in close to 90 new markets in Q1. I don't know how that's possible. They circled LATAM and South Korea as big drivers of premium subscriber growth. Total MAUs, monthly active users, fairly evenly distributed by region. 34% of users are in Europe, 24% in North America, 22% in Latin America, and 20% rest of world. For premium subscribers, Europe and North America, that share swells to a combined 70% for those two regions versus 58% for the total. So more premium people in those two regions. They did note as well, Peter, the Joe Rogan Experience, which became exclusive at the end of the year, but they picked it up late last year, became exclusive to Spotify at the end of 2020. They said that helped add and encourage more users than the company expected. I wonder how many people are watching the video element of that on Spotify.
I don't know. I haven't seen too much data that talks about, the number of people that are watching the podcasts on video. Mm-hmm. And I think that the way that I interpreted them talking about Joe Rogan's podcast being successful among new users was that people who started listening to podcasts were engaging with Joe Rogan's podcast above average. So a lot of the new listeners were listening to Joe Rogan. As I understand it, that's how they were looking at that. Because it's not like someone said in a survey, I signed up because of Joe Rogan.
Right.
So I'm assuming that they're looking and seeing, wow, a lot of these new listeners are listening to Joe Rogan. So it's a good sign. I mean, right, we've talked about that investment a lot, and it's certainly a good sign that they're talking about in Q1.
So at-home listening did well during the lockdowns. And so Spotify CEO, Mr. Eck, thinks the company faces uncertainty in consumption habits as many markets emerge from the pandemic. Peter, in your opinion, how do you expect audio consumption habits in general, not just with Spotify, to change for the remainder of the year?
I don't know that they will change too much. I think that as people spend more time outside, traveling, and just getting out of the house or apartment, then there will be more listening during commutes and more communal listening. As groups. So those are a couple of the things that I think, we were certainly accustomed to seeing pre-pandemic, and that will return sort of later this year as things open up.
So you said communal listening, and I want to circle back to that because on the investors call, finance lead Paul Vogel had said about Spotify that the company's strategy of making Spotify available across users' numerous devices was one of the things that had really worked for them. This surprised me, the idea that they're making Spotify available across lots of devices, because it feels to me that Spotify's kind of missing out on some key areas of music consumption. The first one is at home. I've rarely been to anyone's place where I've gone round and they've been playing music just in the home through Spotify, through any music streaming service, to be honest. Some people have home speakers, not a ton of people. There's no branded Spotify speaker. There's Spotify Connect, which links to other speakers. But at-home listening seems to me to be a huge area where they could grow. In the car as well, to try and capture more in-car listening, Spotify have been testing, as we were talking about before the show, a device car thing, smart music player that clips to the dashboard, allowing voice-activated access to Spotify. So in-car listening as well. Again, unless you have the right phone, the right connected car experience, it's not as easy as just getting in the car, throwing the radio on. And then shared listening, you talked about communal, but I feel like Spotify listening to me is so personal. Maybe it's too personal, because it's rare. I might say to someone, I listen to this song on Spotify, maybe share a playlist, possibly, which I've never actually done, but I know some people do. But in terms of sharing, like listening to something together with people, that doesn't strike me as something that people do much on Spotify.
It's interesting. And when you talk about listening in home, are you talking about hardware specifically, or you're saying that you don't see a lot of people putting on Spotify through Bluetooth speakers and playing with a group?
Yeah, I'd say that.
It's because I would differ there, because I think whenever I'm in a large group, or in a relatively small group over the past year or so, but in general, in a group setting, usually some person is connecting their phone to their Bluetooth speaker or to the TV or to whatever smart speaker. And there's really never issues connecting Spotify to any of those speakers. I actually find that it's pretty seamless, and me just having my phone around, I can be a DJ. Instead of asking someone to pass the aux cord, it's more of just connecting to their Bluetooth device. Do
you find you do that when you're with friends at someone's place, or just general in-home, like at-home listening with, like, whether it's just yourself, whether people, live with their partner or kids? I'm talking about that kind of just hanging out at home experience as opposed to going to someone's house for like a party or something.
Yeah, no, it's kind of the same. I use my phone to connect to the Bluetooth speaker, or even the TV, we have a Roku TV, and it's very easy to connect through the Spotify app and just use my phone as the controller. So I actually find that, they don't have the hardware. And of course, there's an advantage of having sort of a hardware piece that is exactly in sync with what's on your phone or the Spotify app. But through Bluetooth, I think that their strategy of, ubiquity, that's what Daniel Ek always says, this goal of sort of being ubiquitous. I actually think they're doing a pretty good job of it. Hardware is the one area that they're not involved in, other than this brand new thing, which is the car thing. And it's really too early to know how that's doing or whether or not people like it. But I think that the reason they started with that is because they want to dip their feet in the broadcast radio or the satellite radio world of in-car listening, which is something that it's a huge opportunity right now for more digital audio listening in the car right now that hasn't really been achieved at the scale that a lot of digital audio companies would like to see it grow to.
Mm-hmm. So I went and looked at some of the numbers for smart speaker audio listeners. So 70 million, it's a lot of people, 70 million smart speaker audio listeners in America. However, if you look at it another way, it's 1 in 5 Americans. So I think they've got room there to get more people listening to their service or any music streaming company through these smart speakers. There's definitely room to grow. Over the next 4 years, that share goes from 22% to 24%. So it's not as high as you'd think. And then half of Americans listen to audio on their phones. So you've got a lot of listening happening on the phones, a fair amount less listening happening in homes, but there is a lot of room for that to grow. Let's go to the revenue highlights for a second, Peter. Spotify made $2.5 billion in Q1. That's up 16% year on year. 90%, pretty much all of that revenue, 90% of that revenue comes from premium subscribers, people paying to avoid ads, which grew 14%. The rest of the money they made, 10%, came from the ad-supported revenue, which grew 46% year on year. Your thoughts on how much money Spotify was able to make in Q1?
Their ad-supported revenue was certainly impressive. It was above our Q1 estimate for Spotify ad revenue. And that's sort of a trend that we've seen with a lot of these digital companies. Their advertising revenues outperformed what a lot of people thought for Q1. It's down 23% quarter over quarter, but that's pretty normal, where Q4 is a really strong year for advertising revenue, and then it drops down. But it's still 46% growth year over year, right. And that's really impressive.
When you say down, you just mean it's lower than, right?
Exactly.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, 46% growth for ad-supported revenue. That's Spotify's third consecutive quarter of growth after the pandemic struggles of the first half of last year. Peter, prices ticked up for some Spotify plans in select markets, but perhaps a bigger change to the company's music streaming business will be the arrival later this year of its hi-fi lossless streaming tier, which it promises to deliver music in CD quality, lossless audio format to your device, and Spotify Connect enabled speakers in select markets where it's launching. Pricing for the new subscription tier is yet to be announced. Your thoughts on how much of an impact this might make to Spotify?
There will be some people that sign up for this. How many? It's hard to say right now, but it will grow their premium revenue because people will sign up for it. I think it's going to be a differentiator because other competitive services like Apple Music, as far as I know, do not offer sort of a lossless quality streaming option. So it sets them apart a little farther. But I don't think it's going to do too much to move the needle in terms of getting the millions upon millions of people out there to choose Spotify for their overall listening needs. If there's another service that, offers something for cheaper, then I don't think just because Spotify has this hi-fi option for audio files that, that's going to make a huge difference looking at the overall listener audience.
So Spotify, they're letting folks offer subscriptions to their podcast shows, was a recent piece of news. From Spotify, they will initially allow select partners who host their shows on Anchor, which is the company Spotify bought, to charge for content. Everyone else can sign up to the wait list. No Spotify-owned shows will go behind a subscription wall at first. One example of this will be NPR. They plan to launch a public radio podcast subscription service, the company told Axios. And Peter, one of our in other news stories was about Apple. We were talking about this before the show. We're going to drag that another news story forward into the lead. It's our second another news story, but now it's going to become part of the lead because it's Apple planning to start selling subscriptions to podcasts whilst taking a little slice off the top, or quite a big slice for itself. Peter Kafka of Recode reports that starting in May, Apple will let podcast publishers sell subscriptions to individual shows or groups of shows and set their own pricing, starting at 49 cents a month in the US. Apple will keep a 30% of any subscription revenue creators generate in their first year on the platform. After that, Apple's cut drops to 15%. Your reaction to both Spotify and Apple getting into the subscription podcast game?
There have been rumors for a while that both of these companies were going to wade into podcast subscriptions, and it's finally happened. So Apple had their big announcement, and then Spotify came out with their announcement saying that they were going to have subscriptions very shortly after, if not a day or two after. And there are some really key differences in how both of these companies are laying out their podcast subscription plans. I think the biggest one is how much they're charging the various publishers. So Apple will charge $20 a year to podcast publishers, and then they will take a 30% cut in the first year, a 15% cut in the following years. Spotify, on the other hand, is saying that they will take no cut for the first couple years and then a 5% cut beyond that. A big difference for creators and publishers when considering where exactly they're going to want to publish and who they're going to want to work with. Spotify, I think, did one-up Apple in a way by saying, hey, you can come host with us and we won't take as much money out of your pocket as Apple will. I think that is a really big deal. But then moving a bit and thinking about, okay, podcast subscriptions in general, are people going to pay for them? Right now, the sentiment and reading other people's takes online, reading from some experts, nobody thinks that this is going to sort of fundamentally change podcasting. Advertising is always going to be in podcasting. But the reason that this is going to be interesting, and we'll see how this plays out, is because charging somebody for one podcast specifically is a tough ask when there's so much free stuff out there and people are already paying for bundled subscriptions, right? Where you pay a subscription and you get a whole lot of content, a variety of things, a diversity of shows. So this is different in the sense that you're just paying monthly for one specific podcast. And I don't know there's going to be a big appetite for that. Yeah,
I'm very curious to see what the consumer behavior is like with this. I can think of maybe 2 shows I might possibly pay for, and that's it. Maybe that's enough. Sarah Fisher of Axios was saying for podcasts as an industry to grow, the biggest podcast companies need to invest in more ways to help creators get paid, which is why subscription platforms make sense. So this is more about pulling in those creators as opposed to making money for the company. Speaking of making money for the company, Apple's services business, which has the App Store sales and also Apple Music, they're already in great shape. They pulled in close to $17 billion in January to March 2021. That's up 27% year on year because Apple's products business did so well. Had growth of over 60%. Services share fell from 23% to 19%, but Apple has been putting more of an emphasis on services, and this money would fall into that. It's quite surprising, Peter, because Peter Kafka reminds us that Apple invented the podcast back in 2005. They haven't tried to make any money from it since. 2005 as well, which doesn't seem like a long time ago, was somehow before the recession. The other one, not this last one.
Yeah, the other one, right?
Ages so long ago. A few details on the Spotify subscriptions for podcasts. They'll, as Peter said, nothing for the first 2 years. They will have to, creators, podcasters will have to cover the cost of the transaction fees through Spotify's payment partner Stripe. And then also podcasters on Spotify can choose from 3 monthly pricing options. They can charge $3, $5, or $8. Peter, will end with the guidance, I think. Q2 guidance. On the user side, Spotify expects to replicate Q1's 24% year on year with another 24% in Q2. They would need to add 14 million new users in Q2 to be able to do that. Last Q2, they added 13 million, so it's well within reason. Spotify expects to cross the 400 million monthly active users mark, with at least 172 million of those being premium subscribers by the end of this year, 2021. And Spotify also expects to realize 20% revenue growth in Q2, slightly higher than the 16% it saw in Q1 and the 13% it saw in Q2 of 2020. What do you expect to see from Spotify as a whole for the rest of the year?
I think one thing that I'm interested in looking out for is whether or not they can significantly grow the percent of MAUs or monthly active listeners that listen to podcasts. Because in Q1, they said that the percent of their listeners who listen to podcasts was pretty much flat compared to Q4 of last year. And given that we talk about podcasting so much, it's, the interesting, exciting future part of Spotify, they're really sort of banking on that number to grow and more of their listeners to engage with podcasts frequently. So I think that that's going to be a really interesting thing to watch out for. As they're moving into so many different international markets, I think we can expect that podcast penetration will lag a bit as other markets don't have as developed of a podcast following and market. So we'll see if the podcast listening sort of increases looking at the next couple quarters.
That's all we've got time for the first half of the show. It's time now for the halftime report, where we summarize the key takeaways from a lead story in 30 seconds before in other news in the second half of the show. Peter, I just asked you about what you expect from Spotify in 2021, but reflecting on everything we've talked about, whether it's the podcast subscription side of things, whether it's where people will listen to Spotify in the home and the car more, whether it's their Q1 earnings, what do you think are the main takeaways from the first half?
One of the main takeaways is that Spotify really wants to be, as they put it, the audio browser of the world. So the more and more things that they're offering, the more and more types of content that they're offering on their service, we're seeing that they want to be what the Google search bar is for information on the internet. They want to be that entry point for audio. And, we didn't really touch on the live audio stuff, but they're also introducing that with their acquisition of Betty Labs. So that is another thing that they want to be sort of at the forefront of, and they want to have the best offering when you search anything related to audio. They want to be the best place to get that. One more quick key takeaway is that I think that what we'll see the podcast subscriptions move into is I think ultimately it's going to become a podcast subscription bundle where you pay a monthly fee and you get a diverse number of podcasts sort of in a you'll have a library. It'll be the Netflix of podcasts. I don't think that it will stay a one-to-one relationship where you pay for one show per month.
Interesting. We shall see. That's all we've got time for the lead story. It's time now for In Other News, but first a quick word from our sponsor, VTEX. Retail's next competitive threat may come from a business model or channel that didn't even exist a few months ago. This modern dynamic requires companies to adapt quickly, pivoting business seemingly overnight, something traditional commerce platforms just can't support. There's a new enterprise commerce platform on the rise, one that's fast, flexible, and doesn't require 9 months and $1 million to get up and running. Go to vtex.com/eMarketer to learn more. Folks, we're back. It's time now for In Other News. Today, why radio listeners listen to the radio. We already talked about Apple subscription podcasts and voice ad best practices. Story 1. NPR and Edison Research spoke with 1,500 radio listeners at the start of the year to ask them about where they spend their time listening to things. Most of the listening time, 41%, went to radio. The radio listeners that they polled, so it's not surprising. Streaming audio was in second, 18%. Then it went owned music, 10. YouTube music and Sirius XM, each with 9. Podcasts with 6% of listening time. And music channels with 4%. Music channels? Who are these MTV people? Asked why radio listeners listen to the radio, most, 27%, said they listen for their need to consume music. 18% listened for news and information. 17% listened because they liked it being in the background. 16% listened for company and connection. And 9% listened to the radio for all of their audio needs. The radio only people. Peter, thoughts on this research?
Yeah, I didn't think anything here stood out as too shocking or too surprising. 17% for background is pretty high, especially when we're thinking about, advertisements or things like that, where a lot of radio listening is background. It's not sort of actively being listened to. You're not selecting exactly what you want to listen to in that particular moment necessarily. You might find a channel you like, but you're not picking the song, or you're not, picking the news segment per se. Music is still the most popular thing that people are listening to on the radio, with news probably a close second. So this makes sense.
Story 2. We did already. Story 3. VP of Ad Product Strategy at Pandora, Claire Fanning, recently wrote an article in Adweek about how voice technology is changing the future of audio advertising. She speaks about how say-through rates, STRs, measure verbal engagement with voice ads, the voice equivalent of click-through rates. At the end of the piece, she gives some voice ad best practices. So, Peter, which of these do you think is most important and why? Number 1, because it's a new format, voice ads, you have to start the ad with, "This is an ad you can talk to." That's what she says, recommends. Number 2, don't confuse people. Keep the call to action to a simple yes, if you want people to respond to the ad. Number 3, teasing a special offer is better at driving verbal engagement than sharing product information. Number 4, clear voiceovers beats lots of sound design. Number 5, an ad duration of about 10 to 15 seconds long is the sweet spot. Peter, which of these, to recap, explaining that it's an ad, simple call to actions, special offers, clear voiceovers, or 10 to 15 seconds duration, which of these do you think is most important and why?
Being succinct seems very important, simplifying it and having it just be a simple yes, so it's very straightforward for the listener. But I think the most important is probably promotion, because this is a new format, somewhat experimental, and I think if you're going to disrupt what someone's doing and get them to engage, then I think the listener needs to feel like they're getting something out of it. A special offer or a promotion of some sort might be what it takes in order to have them say, okay, I'll stop listening for a second and I'll talk to you and I'll engage with you. And I think maybe it's best, can I add my own little hypothesis for what could be a best practice?
Yeah.
Is having someone do an action that would be sort of later on in the day. So add something to your cart, send an email to me later, create a little notification for me later on. So whatever I'm doing now, it's not going to disrupt me in the moment.
Yeah. Your point about special offer, I think, is a good one. I only pay attention to my friends if they're offering some kind of special offer. Otherwise, I have no time for them. That's all we've got time for today's episode. Thank you so much for joining me. Thank you, Peter.
Thanks, Marcus.
Thank you to Victoria, who edits the show. Thank you to everyone listening. We'll see you guys tomorrow for the Behind the Numbers Daily, an eMarketer podcast made possible by VTEX. Check. All right, let's do it. What we got here? We'll fumble our way through as per usual. Monday? Yeah, Monday.